welcome this evening to celebrate the launch of the marvellous, fantastic work that is Brick Dust by Craig Jordan Baker. So thank you all for coming out this evening to support Craig. I just want to start as well by a big thank you, as always, to Sam and the team at Waterstones, who always support Epoque Press with our launch events. So it's been really great for them to host us this evening. You may also have noticed that there is a camera over there, which is a little bit disconcerting, and a laptop which is doing a live stream of the event this evening. So just in case you were wondering what that's all about, it's through an organisation called Campbell, as you see here, which is the cartography of the political novel in Europe. So they are an organisation that sets out to examine how people in different national and cultural contexts engage with contemporary political issues and thereby share in shaping European societies and politics in this century. Campbell brings together an interdisciplinary research team that seeks not only to impact the rich literary heritage of the 20th century, but also to make the political novel relevant to our current and present experiences. Now, given the actual resurgence of various forms of populism and or authoritarianism that we're experiencing right now, not only in Europe, but in the world, most recently some of the wars that are going on around the world, including Europe, basically now more than ever, organisations like Campbell are extremely relevant to what's going on in Europe, in the world, and what we're trying to do with the arts and literature. And more importantly, they've also kindly supported Craig in the writing of his novel, which does have political themes, but you'll all be pleased to know it's very humorous as well, so don't be put off by that. So I'd just like to say a very, very big thank you for Campbell for the support that they've provided to Craig and to other authors and to literature in Europe in general.
Can you say your name again? Because we missed it at the beginning of the recording.
You can indeed, that's no problem. My name's Sean Campbell from Epoque Press, the founder and editor-in-chief.
Thank you.
So, absolutely delighted to introduce you all to Craig Jordan Baker. Most of you probably know Craig actually through either the work that he does at the University of Brighton, at Westdean College. You may know him by seeing him in bushes and around the woods foraging. Just to be clear on that. Yeah. Foraging and talking about the environment. Some of you might even know him from his most famous pastime of all, which is Morris dancing, which might get a brief reference in the book now and again. So Craig, we've been working with Craig now for a number of years at Epoque Press. We are absolutely honoured to be able to bring his first debut novel to publication, which is called The Merculians, hotly followed by his second work, which is called If the River is Hidden, which he co-authored with the marvellous poet Cherry Smith, who's actually here with us this evening as well, so welcome Cherry. And also we've just had film and TV options signed on that book, so follow this space and watch out for more news on that, which is great news. But obviously we're here today to celebrate the launch of Brick Dust, which has been described as, by Darren Anderson, the author of Inventory and Imaginary Cities, as a raucous tour de force, full of gallows humour, inventiveness and depravity.
Bushes again.
Yeah, all that foraging. It takes a sharp mind to capture the bedlam of life and guide us through it, and a sharper mind still to see the hilarity in it all. So I think he's saying you've got quite sharp minds there as well, Craig, which is really good to hear. So Brick Dust is a sprawling saga of family and class, told by an enigmatic narrator, a hoarder of documents who is trying to lay out a history of the Merculian family. You'll hear a lot about the Merculians. If you haven't bought his first book, The Merculians, we have some here tonight as well, so see me after for that. We also have copies of If the River is Hidden, if you're interested in them. But as the jumble of their lives, the Merculian lives, is pieced together, we witness them migrate, marry, work up library finds, die, build bridges, and Morris dance. So Brick Dust is a comedic tale about the struggle to make something solid when all we have is dust. So, it's my great honour to hand you over now to Craig, who's going to read from his book. Craig Jordan Baker.
Thank you very much. It's absolutely fantastic to be with you this evening, and I really, really appreciate you all coming out. Thank you very much. Not every story gets told, and our understanding or our understandable democratic impulse that every story should get told is in fact impossible. And so we're inevitably left with the question of what stories we tell. Brick Dust is a novel that's about that question. And it's also a novel which has some answers to that question. It's a novel that tells stories. And it tells stories about people that are so unremarkable and about events that are so mundane and everyday that you might ask, what's the point in telling them? What's the worth in telling these stories? And I think that's probably going to annoy a lot of reviewers in future, but we'll see. And I would like to say that because of my unique literary insight and my scintillating prose style, I am lifting the mundane up into the stratosphere. But I don't think I'm doing that. I'm really interested in the idea that we live everyday lives every day, and a lot of our lives, our passions, and our politics are taken up with the everyday, and so much art is actually not about the everyday. And I'm not criticising art that's not about the everyday, but so much is kind of about exceptionalism in artistic representation, and I feel there's plenty of that. And I wanted to maybe focus on some other things, and maybe challenge people to think about stories that aren't always told, and people who sometimes odious, sometimes so modest, sometimes boring people are worth our attention because we live everyday lives every day. I'm going to read from a few sections of the novel, and I'm going to follow one of the characters in this reading, the character Greg Nakulian, who is the third generation of the Nakulian family who migrated from Ireland to an unnamed city in the south of England, which I may well come from. There are lots of arcs in this novel. But they're little arcs. There are no big arcs. There are little arcs that overlap and interweave and sit on top sometimes of one another, like our lives do, I think. And this reading that I'm going to do for you tonight is going to follow one of those arcs, and it's going to follow Greg Nakulian. So this is from chapter 7, and it's set in 1997. And it's called Greg Surfs the Net. And Greg is a teenager at this point. And I'll give a short reading, and then I'll maybe say a few things. I'm going to do 3 readings, 2 small ones and then 1 really tiny one, just to finish things off. So this is Greg Surfs the Net, 1997. The 56k modem flared red. Then it flickered green and red. Then green. Then it made a sound, a long sound, like an android with diarrhea. Go and look it up if you don't believe me. In 1997, the sound was actually quite futuristic. But a few short years later, it would sound like the past. This is, of course, the way of things. But anyone who knows anything about history knows that the sound of a 56k modem in 1997 was, in fact, the sound of the 20th century dying. So, what is the internet then? This was Greg Nakulian's question. Greg was Shannon Nakulian's son, who'd been sired by the local chippy owner, James Radley, in pretty horrible circumstances. When this had happened back in 1985, it would have looked like a slapper being a slapper. But not so many years later, it would look very much like a sustained case of grooming. Al, mate, what is the internet? Greg was sat next to his best friend Al Curtin in Al's computer room. Al was one of Greg's only friends to have a computer, and Al was unique in having a whole room dedicated to computers. Al, as you can see, was not answering as he was busy watching his monitor to check if his 56k modem had in fact managed to 56k its way onto the slipstream of the World Wide Web. While only a small box room with bright white walls, Al's computer room was deeply and abidingly impressive to Greg. This was probably because no computing was done in the Nakulian household, unless you count those little retro handheld ones that are quite collectible nowadays. In Al's computer room, though, there were in fact 2 computers, one for Al and another for Al's dad, strictly off limits to anyone else. Today, we would assume that Al's dad had been storing up child pornography or material sympathetic to the Nazis or to Morris dancers. But this was the 20th century, an innocent time before child pornography or videos of Morris dancing were available internationally. True, later on in the 21st century, Al's dad would have found a means to store considerable amounts of child porn, far-right propaganda, and Morris dancing from the Cotswold villas of Headington on his numerous desktops, laptops, and tablets. By 2016, this would put him into Winchester Nick, with Morris dancing cited as an aggravating factor. While in 1997, Al's dad didn't really do much computing, he made sure his computer was higher powered than Al's Amiga 4000, lest the son begin to think himself superior to the father. As well as being a future inmate of Winchester Nick, in 1997, Al's dad was a barrel-belly police sergeant who was the head, neck and shoulders of Brighton station front desk. As an officer of the law, he was somewhat stereotypically attached to stereotyping. And everything he came across was readily put into a plain little white cell with bright white walls. Sergeant Curtin was the kind of officer who would emphasise great in Great Britain. And whenever he said Great Britain, he only ever meant England. His emphasising didn't stop there though, and the father liked to emphasise words in what Greg took to be odd places. This tendency, Greg had noticed, the son had inherited. "Ah, great, we're on the internet now," said Al. "Let's go to the chat room." Al clicked on the browser address bar and began to type, slowly, with a single finger of each hand. Greg wasn't really sure what a chat room was, and wasn't really sure why Al's 56k modem sounded the futuristic way it did. In fact, he also wasn't sure what the internet actually was. So he tried one last time. "So Al, what is the internet?" Al finished his typing and hit return before he swiveled round in his swivel chair and stared at Greg. Greg couldn't swivel because he'd only been provided with a regular chair. "Greg," said Al, "do you know that in a few years' time that'll be such a stupid question?" Greg drew up a face, as if he was giving this genuine consideration, though he was not quite sure if Al was actually asking him a question or had delivered some startlingly brilliant put-down. You see, the problem was that Al Curtin was smarter than Greg Nakulian. Significantly smarter. And Greg knew it. And Al knew it too. And Al knew that Greg knew it. Though Al was less sure if Greg knew that Al knew that Greg knew it. Because he wasn't really sure how smart Greg really was. Anyway, point being that as well as Al being smarter, the Curtins were also richer than the Nakulians. Significantly richer, which both Greg knew and Al knew. For himself, Greg was just happy to be around things like Amiga 4000s, fully painted armies of space warriors from the 41st century, and small individually wrapped cakes for lunch. For Al, though, things like individually wrapped cakes, expertly dry-brushed armies of space marines, or unbelievably powerful computers with 2 megabytes of memory were the stuff of the everyday. And the silent fallout of all this was that in any context where Al's desires or interests ran up against Greg's, Greg would give way. This, dear reader, is one of the ways in which richer people fuck over poorer people and claim not to know it. Thanks. So maybe you can see some of the sort of developing themes there. I'm really interested in how change happens, and how the past isn't a static thing. The past is always changing in accordance with present mores, present concerns. And so the past itself, while we think of it as gone in some sense, is a really dynamic thing. And what counts as futuristic or old time is constantly changing. And I'm really interested in those processes. I'm also interested in how even relatively small inequalities between people can lead to power dynamics that are in some sense kind of in some ways problematic or damaging. I mean, I myself, from a working class background, and I had friends that were slightly richer than me. I mean, I now know they were only slightly richer than me. To me, they seemed a hell of a lot richer than me. And I did take a lot of shit from friends because they had Space Marine armies. And I think that's a really important kind of aspect of interpersonal kind of politics. The next section I want to read still follows Greg, but we're now 25 years later, in the year 2022. And this chapter is called A Plain Caper. Now, for those of you who are interested and take part in a certain kind of English folk dance, you'll know that a plain caper is in fact a double entendre in this context. And for those of you who are not interested in a certain kind of English folk dance, then I will just leave that hanging. This is called A Plain Caper, chapter 10. And it's Greg 25 years later, so he's no longer a teenager. He's grown up. He's got a job. He's got a little flat, and his life is proceeding. The first rule of the Morris is talk about the Morris, and the second rule of the Morris is talk about the Morris. The men of Titanic Morris were keen to talk about the Morris. And they impressed upon their members the need to talk about Morris dancing to their friends, family, co-workers, strangers, and to the few foreign tourists who had come to the city, either by accident or because they were interested in the Titanic and its romantic and fatefully doomed voyage. On occasions when this happened, tourists would record the Morris men on their phones as they danced outside the civic centre or outside pubs such as the Garden Wall in Brighton or the Common Bond in Thornhill. When this happened, electric threads of Morris dancing would emanate across the globe and find their way onto phones, tablets, desktops and laptops in places as far-flung as Argentina, Japan, Zimbabwe, the Solomon Islands and Sri Lanka. And then Argentinians, Japanese, Zimbabweans, Solomon Islanders and Sri Lankans would watch amazed that a country which had had the world under its thumb for hundreds of years was all this time dancing about with jingly bells, well-ironed hankies, and clackety-clack sticks of hazel. It was the first Thursday of September, and in Thornhill Working Men's Club, the men of Titanic Morris were warming up. The main hall had an acneed wooden dance floor, flanked on two sides by uneven ranks of flimsy fold-up chairs. In front of the dance floor was an unusable lighting rig which pointed at a small raised stage that occasionally hosted tribute acts, Santa's grottos, and an assortment of tombolas, raffles, and sweepstakes. Under the hall's searing strip lights, the men of Titanic Morris were raising their knees and elongating their hamstrings and rolling their shoulders and flexing their necks. They don't have one neck. In years past, they had practiced over in Brighton, but due to the hall there being transformed into a hipster craft ale taproom, the men had shifted east to the city's outskirts, where time seemed to run a little slower. As they were stretching, double-stepping, skipping, capering and sauntering about the hall, Greg Nakulian shuffled through the double doors. All turned to look. "Hello, hello," said Dave, the squire of Titanic Morris. "New blood," remarked Colin, the foreman of Titanic Morris. "Is this the Morris dancing?" asked Greg. "That's right, my lad. This is the Morris." said little Dave, bagman of Titanic Morris. You've just heard the terms squire, foreman and bagman, which are, you'll gather, terms related to the Morris. And if I thought you really cared about the Morris, then I'd explain them. But I know you're not here. I know you're here for Greg Nakulian, not the Morris. And if you actually do care about the Morris, then you probably already know what a squire, a foreman and a bagman are, so you don't need me to tell you. And what age are you then? Dave followed up. Sorry? Don't be sorry, lad. Tell us your age, said Colin. The question of age seemed to have summoned Titanic Morris towards Greg, and they gathered around him in a ragged semicircle, where macularly degenerated eyes and rubbery ears were watching and paying attention to his answer. I'm 37, and a sigh went around the room. Little Dave muttered the words, late 30s. But others opined that this might have even been considered mid-30s. While it's not worth explaining what a squire, foreman and bagman are, it is worth explaining why a bloke of 37 is anything to remark upon. So, if you ask the organisations claiming to speak for the Morris what the average age of a dancer was, then the Morris Federation, the Morris Ring, Open Morris and others would tell you that the average age of a Morris dancer is 53 and a woman. The men of Titanic Morris, then, were not strictly speaking your typical Morris side. Firstly, by being men, and secondly, by being around 60 on average. And this increasing every year, as Dave the Squire liked to joke. In Titanic Morris, men in their mid-40s are referred to as nippers, tights and toddlers. And if anyone in their 30s joined, then these members would be called babies, embryos and glints in the milkwoman's eye. Of course, partly because of this, there were no members in their 30s. And the joke that Titanic Morris was slowly sinking was enjoyed by all, in that grim, rough and tumble humour of proper men. As you probably guessed, Titanic Morris prided themselves on their links to the history of the Titanic and its fatefully doomed voyage. And their black and red cross-stitched insignia featured a large ship hitting an iceberg. But anyway, now that Greg Nakulian had come along, perhaps things were about to change. Perhaps there was going to be a new member in their 30s to boot. And as they stood around him, little Dave was doing the mental arithmetic and planning to drop a new iceberg-sized fact in the pub later, that the inclusion of this 37-year-old brought their average age down by well over a year. Greg smiled fixedly. This was partly because he was chuffed that anyone would be paying him attention, because the world rarely paid Greg Nakulian attention, unless they were taking the piss out of it. Though this smile was something of a mask. It was a mask that hid the confusion and terror any normal person would feel when the eye of the Morris descends upon you. And right now, it was firmly upon Greg. Thank you. Thanks. I've got one a little tiny paragraph just to finish off with. You've been really kind. I just want to say a few thank yous. There are lots of people to thank, so I can't thank everyone, but as the cliche goes, you know who you are. But I especially want to pick out, I want to thank Sean Campbell for being an absolute tireless asshole in forcing me, effectively cajoling me and annoying me to continue to write this novel. And I didn't think he was right. I didn't think there was a novel there, and he was right, and you are right, and I was incorrect. And thank you for your yeah. That's the only time I'm saying it. And I also want to thank my really good friend B. Hitchman. Last year we went on residency together in County Down, and we spent some wonderful days writing and sharing work, and it really gave me confidence, and it was really lovely to have a companion in that space, and I got a lot of the novel actually written there and a lot of the bones. I also want to thank Cherry Smith, because Cherry has guided me for over several years, and has really not only have I co-authored a book with her, but you're just wonderful. So thank you. And the last thing I want to read is from the same chapter, and I want to read it because I think it sums up some of the things I'm concerned about the mundane and about everyday life. And it's just a little bit further on when Greg is going home after practice and the pub, and it's on page 145. Want to follow along? As he's safe looking through, so I wondered if you want to follow along. I think sort of captures, I hope, some of my concerns and some of the themes of the novel. It may have been because he'd drunk more than usual, but Greg felt inclined to take another rare peek into the mirror of his life. Now that he was part of the side, Greg had the sinking feeling that he'd never leave Titanic Morris. Or maybe it wasn't a sinking feeling. Maybe that's just a cheap joke about the doomed voyage of the Titanic and that I'm trying to shoehorn in. But if it wasn't a sinking feeling, then it was a feeling of inevitability. Yes, that's better. Inevitability was what he was feeling. Of course, some of us think we're action heroes, starring in the blockbuster film of our own lives. And for people who are the action hero type, they'll see inevitability as a fearful thing, because it seems limiting. But I think we're not action heroes at all. And there's no film of our lives, except maybe a few videos on the internet of us clubbing or having sex or Morris dancing in front of Argentinian tourists. See, non-action hero people look at inevitability as a promise that will be kept. And good or bad, there's some comfort